I mean, I could keep asking you questions for hours.
Well, the interesting thing is Wikipedia won't put my biography up.
They're shadow banning you.
This
Yeah.
very vital information that's in the science, it's in the study, is being withheld from women. And this tells you that the whole thing is economic. It's not about health, it's about economic.
If we're allocating all of our resources to interventions, we're not allocating enough resources to preventing these diseases.
More and more, we're finding that these seed oils are just terrible news.
There are some moms that would drive 5 hours across state lines to get raw milk for their child.
In fact, I think the greatest crisis facing America today is the health of our children.
I'm Nicole Shanahan. Welcome to Back to the People podcast, which highlights the growth of a movement uniting America, where our government is free from corporate capture and where we give voice back to the American public. Sally Fallon Morell, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I have your book in front of me, the Nourishing Traditions Book of Baby and Child Care. Oops, here it is.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful book. I had started down a path of regenerative agriculture when I was looking for solutions for climate change. At the time, I still believed much of the myopic views around carbon emissions and global warming. And I picked regenerative agriculture after much, much deep research, realizing that this was both a benefit for our environment, could draw down enormous amounts of carbon, and also would feed and nourish people.
And yes, build soil and remineralize the soil. And when you have your cows on pasture, beef becomes the most environmentally friendly meat.
It's true. It actually can be a net drawdown to have cows out on pasture land. And so my journey continued. It started to involve things like raw milk, which is something I would have never imagined I'd ever be interested in. I believed the common medical recommendations that raw milk was dangerous and to be avoided.
It'd kill you. Yeah, that's right.
And then,
I sat next to Bobby at our conference banquet a couple of years ago, and we got to talking about raw milk. And he said he'd grown up on raw milk, but he didn't know where to find it. And we have a website that helps people find raw milk. So he emailed me and said he'd found it close by.
yeah, and it was actually I was starting to post on social media some evidence that raw milk was really great. And I was hearing from other autism moms the incredible benefits. There are some moms that would drive 5 hours across state lines to get raw milk for their child because it would immediately put their child into a more regulated, happy, focused state.
Nicole, I've been told that so many times by parents that if they just make one change in their diet, and this change is easy, you just do raw milk instead of pasteurized. The big change they notice is the improvement in the child's behavior. They calm down, they do better at school, they sleep better. And that's because raw milk is so highly digestible compared to pasteurized milk, which is almost impossible to digest.
Yeah. And so it was after I posted about raw milk that people started sending me Weston A Price Foundation materials. And they said,
Oh, okay.
you have to look at this foundation. They have been doing this since the 1990s.
Yeah.
And I went to the page, and it was this mysterious experience of, oh my gosh, who are these gatekeepers to wisdom, and where have they been? And I went down. It was almost the same experience I had after getting to know the work of Ron Paul. Realizing that Ron Paul had been talking about these things for decades. And then I found Weston A Price, and this is not long ago. This is maybe 2 months ago that I really took a look, and it's everything that I have collected on my journey around climate and health and wellness and addressing autism and chronic disease are on your website.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
complete consolidation. How
Yeah.
how did you went to Stanford, I saw, and UCLA. You're a very decorated professional and academic. How did you put all of this together? I know you were inspired by the work of Weston Price, but I'd love to hear the full background and the full story.
I'm from California, and my dad used to say everything new starts in California. And they were the original foodies. They traveled a lot, and my mother was a wonderful cook, and they'd travel and they'd come home and she'd fix all these things that they'd eaten on their travels. So I grew up in a family that was very interested in food, and we always used butter and real food. My father would not let us use what he called ersatz food, which was fake food. And so this was pretty much ingrained with me. I love to cook, and we cooked French cuisine. And the message started to come out that we should be low fat. We shouldn't eat butter, shouldn't eat eggs. And of course, that wasn't the way I was eating. And at the same time, I discovered Weston Price, and it just confirmed what I was doing, that it's okay to eat these rich animal foods. It's okay to eat animal fats. It's okay to enjoy pate and these foods that the French love so much. So I just continued, and fast forward, when my kids were older, and by the way, so I raised these 4 children. They were very healthy on this diet, and good students and all. I got the idea to write Nourishing Traditions, which was the precursor to the book you have. And it was an idea that took hold of me. I couldn't shake it. I didn't want to write this book, but so I pressed forward and wrote Nourishing Traditions. And then after that came out, we started this organization, the Weston A. Price Foundation. So that was 1999, and I'm completely trapped. I can't get out. This is what I'm here to do. So
Wow. And so Weston Price's story, as I understand it, he was doing research in the 1930s and he was a dentist.
he was a dentist, and he kept asking himself, why are my patients so sick? They have cavities, they have infection, and they have crooked teeth. And he just didn't think this was right. He had a nephew who worked for the National Geographic, and the world was opening up. And when anthropologists and explorers went to new places on the planet, the first thing they noticed was what beautiful teeth these people had. Beautiful, wide and straight as piano keys, they would say. So he was very interested in this, and he thought, I'm going to see this for myself. So he started on this series of investigations. It took him 10 years to go to all these places, and he wrote them up in the book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration.
Wow. And you dedicated an entire foundation in his honor.
His name, yes, yes. I mean, we do other things a lot. We've learned a lot since Dr. Price's day, and I think the most important thing we do is bring the science, make it understandable, show how it supports what Dr. Price discovered.
What has your journey been like trying to advocate for raw milk? I've been looking at some of the legislation. Raw milk's illegal in I think 36 states still.
Well, no, it's when we started, we set up realmilk.com, and at that time, 27 states allowed farmers to provide raw milk in one way or another, either retail, from the farm, herd shares, or pet milk. That was 27 states. Today, we're up to 47
Oh,
states. So there's
okay.
only, I mean, the FDA doesn't want us to know how available raw milk is, and their numbers are all wrong. But we have the laws. I have a raw milk map where you can find what the laws are. And then you can put your zip code in and find the raw milk near you.
On your website. That's a great resource.
Yes, yes. And of course, it's very available in California, always has been. The most successful dairy in the world is in California. It's the raw dairy. Their income is 30 million a year. I mean, that's amazing. And they're supplying raw milk all over California. And they're not the only dairy that does that. There's others. And yeah, it's just kind of exploded, especially as the FDA started talking about bird flu and raw milk. It was like free publicity. And raw milk sales have gone up 65% since they started that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So,
yeah, it's really interesting how that works, especially in a world where they really are trying to condition us to, quote, trust the experts of the government. And meanwhile, I was under the impression that it really was hard or impossible to get for many people in many states, that it was illegal or banned in one way or another in over 30 states. But you've just blown my mind with this new data. Um, so,
yeah. And I always like to say it's not illegal anywhere to purchase, possess, or consume.
mhm.
It's only illegal for some farmers in some states to provide it. And this tells you that the whole thing is economic. It's not about health, it's about economics.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about the economics because you have spent a lot of time talking about how many of our dietary guidelines are the product of corporate interest. That dietary guidelines around, for example, consumption of seed oils, or that saturated fat leads to heart disease, or that animal fats are bad for your overall health and metabolic health, and that the list goes on and on. Pasteurized milk is safer for you. You've really taken on many of the areas of current dietary guidelines and have debunked them, claiming that in fact that the current dietary guidelines are responsible for many of our health conditions today.
Absolutely. I think these dietary guidelines are a type of genocide, actually, over several generations. You absolutely need animal fats, the nutrients in animal fats, the type of fatty acids in animal fats to grow properly. After all, butter is the fat in nature for the growth and development of all mammals, including human mammals. And when we take it out of our diet and put industrial seed oils in, and more, we're finding that these seed oils are just terrible news. And then you add that to the huge amounts of sugar that we eat. You've got a recipe for disaster, and it's showing up in our children. In fact, I think the greatest crisis facing America today is the health of our children. And politicians need to address this because it's becoming so obvious. One child in two has a serious illness, and infertility is growing. It's just happening all over the world because the seed oils have taken over, and they're so powerful, and they have such influence that they can get away with saying that these toxins are better for you than real fats and real food. And by the way, there was a very interesting study where they gave rats, first of all, they got them addicted to sugar, to the sugar water. And then they gave them a diet that was 40% lard, and the rats didn't want the sugar water anymore. They got over their addiction to sugar water. And the researchers said, "Oh, isn't this terrible? The rats don't want their, tasty treats anymore." But I always say this to people who are addicted to sugar, and so many people are. If you increase your fat content, you won't want the sugar as much.
It's really interesting you just shared that story. We just learned that with my daughter, who has serious sugar addiction. She'll go through all of the cupboards, throwing them over, climbing where she shouldn't be climbing to find that one little piece of chocolate I hid somewhere in the house. And I'll put a slab of raw milk butter, raw butter, on a piece of toast. She loves butter. She craves butter too. And she'll eat the butter and it's almost immediate. It's incredible how fast it works. She no longer is in this frenetic, sugar hunting state.
Oh, that's so interesting, Nicole. Yes, so fats raise dopamine and sugar raises dopamine. So if you are depriving yourself of fats, you are going to crave sugar.
Yeah.
And sugar is completely empty. The whole point of what we're teaching is nutrient density. And if half of what you eat is empty, you're going to be really cheating yourself on nutrients.
Yeah. 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 And they talk about the hidden hunger children have today. I oftentimes see supplements being sold under the marketing of this supplement solves for the hidden hunger epidemic at our children.
Yeah. I don't think it can be done with supplements. It starts with getting our animals back on grass, like as you said, and making the soil nutrient dense, and then the meat and the milk and the butter, and um, just getting that nutrient density back into our food. And then a lot of it has to do with how food is prepared. And so we're big advocates of sourdough bread because when you make the sourdough bread, you liberate the minerals and you increase the good amino acids and you get rid of all the toxins and blockers in wheat and grains. So a lot of it has to do with proper preparation.
You mentioned in some of your work too that fermentation of foods really solves a lot of our GI issues, and that for generations now humans have practiced fermentation, and especially fermentation of grains.
Right. There's no exception to this. Every culture ferments foods. Every native culture has a fermented food or many fermented foods. And science has kind of caught up with what these traditional people knew instinctively, that we should have 6 pounds of healthy bacteria in our guts. And the way we do this is to eat fermented foods every day, get those good bacteria in there.
How many pounds?
6. I know it
Six
sounds amazing,
pounds
but
of bacteria?
pounds of healthy bacteria lining the small intestine, and they are 85% of our immune system.
No
So
way.
yeah, you definitely want to nourish your gut biome.
Yeah, the market for probiotics has really exploded in recent years. And the way that medicine is currently treating it is, well, let's just isolate the bacteria, the good bacteria, put it into powder or pill form, and hope that it synthesizes with the stomach. But intuitively, it seems like we're missing something here, that it would be better to get it from a more live,
Live
active
ones.
source.
There's actually more probiotics and more types of probiotics in 1 tablespoon of sauerkraut than there is in a whole bottle of probiotic pills. So
Whoa.
yeah.
And you can just ferment your own sauerkraut. I mean, I buy mine at the store, but there's, sauerkraut and kimchi, but you can make this stuff at home for next to nothing. I mean, a chunk of cabbage and some vinegar and spices. Is that right?
No vinegar.
No vinegar.
No.
Okay.
And this is not acetic acid. It's lactic acid that you want, and that's what your stomach wants.
Okay.
But it's easy to make, and now you can buy them too. So
Let's talk about something I read actually this morning in your book, Nourishing Traditions. You said you said something about baby monitors, and I raised my first child very much according to the current state of how we think about early childhood and bringing a baby home and mitigating risk. Parents today are terrified.
yes,
There's so
yes,
much
there.
fear. They'll tell you every single risk out there. You start taking these tests from the time of pregnancy, and it's just endless in and outs of the hospital from the moment you find out you're pregnant. It's really a gauntlet. And parents are terrified of SIDS, and so now there's a whole market of products that live monitor newborns. And I remember after I brought my daughter home, asking myself if I wanted all of these wireless monitoring systems around her. And something intuitively told me that having these battery charged or devices that were emitting signal back to our Wi-Fi router or Bluetooth network was not a good thing. That something intuitively told me that there was radiation or radical electrons or something. I mean, I didn't, at the time, I really didn't understand the science of it, but instinctively, it didn't feel right. And my maternal emotions really craved something else, but I didn't know what that something else was. I would love to hear your take. You're the first person I've ever read call out baby monitors.
Okay. Well, the alternative is to leave the door open so you can hear the baby yourself. That's the alternative. Yeah, you're just surrounding your newborn with a lot of EMF, and if it's the current Wi-Fi system, that's microwaves. Microwaves. Now, they may not have a lot of power density. Maybe they do. I don't know. But you want to create an atmosphere for your baby that's as free from EMF as you can. And so we recommend turning off your Wi-Fi and wiring your internet so you have wired internet. So your baby is not in this all the time because they're young and very vulnerable. And I think we've been one of the first organizations to warn about this. This causes illness. We believe that COVID was caused by the rollout of 5G. It started in Wuhan after they had turned on 10,000 base stations in Wuhan, and then traveled across Europe as they were rolling out this wonderful new technology, 5G, and same in the United States, first in New York and then in the large cities. And we think there's a very good epidemiological case that can be made for this and a biological case that what we need to do now is minimize our exposure. We're not saying that we should have these technologies, but we need to be careful with them.
I've never heard that theory before, that there is a correlation or a direct relationship between the virality of the COVID-19 vaccine, which we're now realizing was a lab leak from a Wuhan lab, but that it.
Well, we don't subscribe to that either. We
Oh,
just think it was
really?
a cover up. Yeah, it's just a cover up. It's not caused by a virus. We don't hold to the theory that viruses exist at all. They've never been able to isolate and characterize a single virus. So yeah, it's all kind of, sleight of hand, the way they say they found these viruses. When you look closely at any disease, you can find other causes. TB is supposed to be caused by a bacteria, but it's identical to a disease called siderosis, which is iron poisoning. And in the 1800s, you had iron everything, iron steam, in the steam of the trains and in the cast iron stoves in the houses. And, the Crimean War, which almost everybody got TB, was iron bullets and iron grenades and iron cookware. And so as we've, transitioned to stainless steel and are not burning coal anymore as much, and coal dust is full of iron, TB has gone way down. So it's always easy to say, oh, this is the bacteria, this is the virus, and it lets them off the hook of going against some powerful industry, for example. So
You're
if you
blowing my
look
mind here.
carefully, yeah, you can find the real causes of disease.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I thought that I was kind of sussing out where, the greatest weaknesses were in the current paradigm of healthcare, but you really, you really blew my mind. I mean, I heard I've been hearing people talk about how, our current understanding of viruses is inaccurate. And that I can understand. I can understand that how we think about viruses and virality in general might not be precise, and that more investigation is necessary to understand really what the functions of virality are. And you're saying that there is an environmental component, so the cell body as it interacts with its environment, its direct environment, not necessarily viruses themselves, which are these living organisms that are described as jumping from host to host. But there's also this additional cellular metabolic disease that mimics how we commonly think of viruses, in terms of an expression of sickness. Is that what I'm hearing you
Yeah.
say?
So, first of all, we've got two things. We've got bacteria, which we can see,
Right.
and viruses, which, you see these little round things in the electron microscope. They're most likely an artifact of how the sample has been prepared, because you go through it's not living tissue that you're looking at in the electron microscope. And we believe that those little circles that you see, that's just caused by how they prepare the tissue. I could talk a lot about that, but bacteria are very often associated with disease, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean they cause the disease. The bacteria are nature's cleanup crew. And when tissue is breaking down, either because of toxins or poor nutrition, the bacteria appear. In fact, there was a wonderful study done. This is back in 1925. They took vitamin A out of the diet, and the animals developed all sorts of health problems. But the inflammation and the infection, which is the bacteria, they came after, they didn't come before. So the inflammation is the body's attempt to deal with this situation, and the infection is the cleanup crew trying to get rid of the dead tissue. And we really need to start looking at disease in a new way, because the germ theory has been kind of the ruling theory, and it's not getting us anywhere. And of course, all vaccinations are based on the germ theory and the viral theory. And which, once you throw that out, you don't have any justification for vaccinating. So you can see how the establishment would cling to that theory.
How have you been able to? I can't imagine how many attacks you've received.
Actually, very few. Uh,
Really?
Very few. Certainly not. I mean, all the websites that rate the organizations that rate websites say that we're bad website, full of misinformation. But personal attacks, I've had very few, and I think it's because even bad publicity is good publicity and brings people to your site, and they just don't want people to see what we're doing because it resonates so profoundly with people,
Yeah.
especially parents, that the more hidden we are, the better. I think that's what they think.
Fascinating. Because I've been spending quite a bit of time with these very high profile individuals that have been deplatformed, publicly attacked, called conspiracy theorists, have had whole Wikipedia updates done to their profile where they're named as, dangerous misinformation purveyors. I've been on the receiving end of that as well. And so I just assume that if you're challenging the existence of viruses and you have a paradigm that provides evidence for that thesis, that this is a major. This is huge. I mean, this is major. I would expect that multiple sources would try to silence you.
Well, the interesting thing is Wikipedia won't put my biography up.
Oh, so they're
They won't
shadow
even
banning
do
you.
a biography of me. Yeah. Now the Weston A. Price Foundation on Wikipedia is pretty fair. I mean, they say we're misinformation, but they do accurately describe what we teach.
Mhm.
So, but them, it's they just don't want people to know what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have to say there's got to be something about how you present this information as well. And I was really caught off guard by your style of writing. It's very matter of fact, but it's very organized. It's one of the most organized writings I've read on nutrition, health, and wellness. There's no hyperbole. You're succinct. The chapters are focused. Topics are well labeled. It's been described actually by others as a Bible, in the sense of really going in and outlining all of the most important topics of childhood health. And you back it up with an incredible amount of science as well. Did you just sit down and decide that you were going to map it out in this way, or where did your guidance come from for this?
Well, I was very lucky. I had a mentor. I think my greatest mistake in life was I didn't take probability and statistics at Stanford, and I was a math minor, but I didn't take statistics because I thought it would be too hard. And I really should have done that because I would be much more qualified in many ways. But I did have a wonderful mentor, Mary Enig, who was an expert on lipids. And she needed a voice. I needed the science, and she needed a voice. She is the scientist who blew the whistle on the trans fats. And she was also very concerned about the vegetable oils and showed me, introduced me to the literature of the time. And another thing she was expert on was salt and how important salt was in our diets. And of course, that's the other thing we're being told not to eat. And one of the most serious things we do is tell pregnant women not to eat salt and not to put salt in the baby food. And salt is critical for the development of the brain and nervous system, and among many other things. So I was extremely fortunate, and we miss her a lot. She's gone now, but she helped me write Nourishing Traditions, and a lot of what she told me about baby formula. She was gone by the time I wrote the book you have, but she knew a lot about how baby formula was manufactured, shared that with me also.
Let's talk about that. A lot of young moms are really concerned about baby formula. During COVID, there was a shortage, and then there was also a few of the baby formula manufacturing sites that were shown to have great contamination issues
Yeah.
and quality
And a lot of
issues.
babies died. It was, yeah, they kind of hide that. But one of the most important things about mother's milk is that it's very rich in cholesterol. And it has special enzymes that ensure that the baby absorbs 100% of that cholesterol because babies really need cholesterol. They can't make it. They need it for hormone production. They need it for their brains. They need it for the cell lining of their guts. They just need it for everything. And the real scandal about baby formula is it contains no cholesterol. It's made with skim milk and vegetable oil. So we get cholesterol from animal fats. We get it from the butter in the milk, the cream in the milk. And baby formula is skim milk and vegetable oils. If you buy milk replacer for animals, the third ingredient is animal fat because the vets know the animals will die if they don't get the fats. So this is the really great scandal about formula. Now, our most visited page on our website is our baby formula page because we have a recipe for baby formula that's based on raw milk and contains cream and is tailored to use whole foods to make something that is as similar to mother's milk as we can get it. And we have had, I would say, 20 to 30,000 babies on this formula, and they have just thrived. It's been a real lifesaver for these children. There's lots of reasons why moms can't nurse, thyroid problems, poor nutrition in the moms, maybe they're working, but a lot of moms just don't have enough milk, and we need something to replace that, and that's what our, raw milk baby formula has done, and that was my colleague, Mary Enig, who wrote that recipe for us.
I mean, you even talk about breast infections, dealing with, breastfeeding is really, really hard. I did it, but man, was it hard. And you line up all of these topics in the order that a mom faces these questions. So, you have cracked and sore nipples next to probiotics for baby, breast infections, breastfeeding jaundice, fussiness, gas, and spitting up. I mean, that was a really, really hard one for me for a little while. It's wasn't full colic, but so many of these babies today have really painful GI systems.
Yeah, I know, and you ask about my journey. Part of my journey was that I have 4 kids, and the first one I did breastfeed with a lot of effort, like, half the time I felt like I was breastfeeding. And once she got on solid food, she was so much happier because I just did not have enough milk. But my boys, well, my second child was a boy, and he was starving. I mean, he would throw back his head in rage because I didn't have enough food for him. And if you haven't lived through this, I mean, I'm sure you understand. It's just the most
It's the
horrible
worst
thing in the
feeling.
world.
Yeah.
So I had a book called Nutrition for Tots to Teens, and it had a recipe for baby formula based on raw milk. And I went out, at that time, I could get some raw goat milk at the health food store. And I didn't even have all the ingredients. And I gave him that bottle of milk, and he didn't cry. He drank it all down. And after that, it was wonderful,
Yeah.
So that's really the thing that's made me so passionate about raw milk because it saved my baby and it saved my other 2 boys also. So moms need this milk and that their children need this milk.
Yeah. I mean, especially given how we talk, you talk about this in your book and in your other writings as well, but it's generational. So
Yes,
what's
yes.
happening metabolically is that the generations that are being born are less able to live these healthy, robust lives. And
That's right. It's weaker with each generation.
yeah,
And this is why I say we're in the 11th hour. And, you know, my goodness, we have a lot of problems in the world, but the number one problem that we have to face is the health of our children.
you've been tracking this generationally. I was born in 85, and many of my peers are either not having children, struggling to have children.
We're going to get pregnant. Yes.
And then those that are successful, they then credit IVF for the reason that they were lucky enough to be a parent. And they think IVF is this miracle intervention. They couldn't imagine life without IVF. And they become some of the biggest proponents for IVF for their peers. And then those who get burned by IVF for one reason or another, because maybe their biology is incompatible even with IVF, I then see the psychology lead to this almost out of body experience. They've given up on their bodies entirely, which is, I think, an effect of infertility. That you somehow remove yourself from this reproductive lineage, and then you become accepting of it, that this is your fate and this is your reality. There's not a lot of answers provided, and I see quite a bit of nihilism at that point. But then I also see some people, finding alternatives to parenthood and living very like lovely and fulfilling lives. But these are really tough arcs to live through. And it's become normalized that this is our world. I just had a debate with a friend of mine who's very committed to investing in cancer research and thinks that modern day medicine and modern day science is a miracle, and she couldn't be more excited by it. And she had a successful IVF baby, and she finds what I do very confusing. She We have these huge disagreements about where we should be putting her energy. She believes you should put all of your energy in modern medicine, these breakthrough, incredible therapies that help people overcome their cancer diagnosis. And I think that many of the things causing cancer are tractable and traceable, and that we should not become complacent with the current state of health. And it's actually a much harder argument to make for in my neighborhood, anyways.
Yeah, well, let me tell you about 2 studies, and I've written articles on this. One was back in the 90s, 1990s, they got rats to have cancer either by injecting carcinogens or actual cancer cells. And then they gave them 3 different types of fats. If they gave them the seed oils, the polyunsaturates, the cancers grew. If they gave them saturated fats, the cancers didn't grow. If they gave them CLA, which is a fat that you only get from the fats of grass-fed animals, the cancers disappeared.
Whoa.
So here we have in the fats of grass-fed animals, the fats that nature has provided us since we lived on the planet, help us get rid of cancer.
What
So the
is this
answer was
CLA? You said CLA.
CLA, it's called conjugated linoleic acid. And it's only in the fats of grass-fed animals. It's in grass-fed butter. It's in grass-fed beef fat. I don't know about pork fat, but for ruminant animals, it's in the fats. And so here is our protection, and our therapy is the fats of grass-fed animals. The other study I wanted to tell you about was it was by a man named Chavara. He was at Harvard, and he had women who couldn't get pregnant, and they were all on low-fat diets. And he told them they'd put them on, no, excuse me, they put one group on a low-fat diet, and they put the other group on, told them to eat full-fat dairy and butter and everything. And the ones who ate the full-fat dairy got pregnant, but the ones on the low-fat diet did not get pregnant. So is anybody telling women trying to get pregnant to eat butter and to eat eggs and to, eat fats? No, they're not telling them that. But that's what the study showed. And it was very embarrassing because he comes from Harvard, which is always pushing this low-fat diet. And he said, well, if you do get pregnant on your high-fat diet, once you're pregnant, you can go back on the low-fat diet again. And with horrible advice, don't you think that the type of diet that gets you pregnant is the type of diet you need to grow a healthy baby?
Yeah. Yeah. So true.
So this very vital information that's in the science, it's in the studies, is being withheld from women, who have this huge desire to get pregnant. And it's criminal. It's really criminal.
That's been my feeling and largest criticism of the fertility intervention world is that it doesn't actually rely on science. They claim to
Yeah, yeah.
be providing you the
It's a
latest and greatest in
technology.
science.
It's a technology. Yeah, it's just we have lots of technologies, but it's not really the science. And I don't want to denigrate everything in modern medicine. In many cases, it can be life-saving. Look at the wonderful strides we've made in dealing with kidney stones. Um, it used to be it could be a death sentence, but now they have, ultrasound, and they have lasers, and they can really handle these kidney stones. And that's wonderful. That's a great stride. That's the wonderful thing about modern medicine. But we have to be discerning. Not everything about modern medicine is wonderful. And I think one thing that's not wonderful is what we do to cancer patients.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of just goes to the allocation of resources. If we're allocating all of our resources to interventions, we're not allocating enough resources to preventing these diseases, which are
Or
very
treating them
traceable.
in a natural way.
Yeah.
It's considered illegal to do anything but chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery.
Is that true?
Radiation is much improved. They don't radiate the whole body anymore. It's very targeted, and they are getting better results. Surgery is sometimes life-saving, necessary. But I don't know if I could say that about chemotherapy, but um, let's take these things that are helpful and work and combine them with what we know about nutrition. Let's make sure that every person with cancer is on the fats of grass-fed animals. That's what the science shows.
Yeah, the plant-based diet movement was very compelling. And the way that it was sold to people was that it would reduce heart disease.
Yeah,
Plant-based is cheaper. It's better for the environment,
yeah.
and
All
you'll
the
live
virtue
longer.
signaling. It's all right there. Yes, yes.
But it turns out plant-based diets for most people are are really laying the foundation for metabolic degeneration.
Yeah, well, they're very lacking in important nutrients. And it's not true that they'll prevent cancer. There was a very interesting study where they found that the people on vegetarian and vegan diets had more cancer, more tooth decay, more mental illness, more allergies, lower quality of life. They didn't make as much money, for example, overall. And I think people are being deceived. You definitely need the animal products in your diet. This is one of the things that Dr. Price discovered. All the healthy traditional people had animal foods in their diet. And they went to a lot of risk and effort to get the animal foods.
And there's some people who won't eat animal foods for ethical reasons. They find that the killing of the animal, the loss of life, this idea that you would eat, dead meat is somehow, brutal. And, and it's true. There's elements to it that sometimes I feel are quite brutal. I visited one of the best farms in the United States, White Oak pastures in Georgia, and the cows were glistening. They were so healthy, and they have a slaughterhouse on site. They have a Temple Grandin corral leading up to the slaughter, and they do processing right there. And it is undeniable that final moment of processing a cow it's tough. And I know that you have been involved in farming, that you're very close to the source of where your food comes from. You've spent a lot of time studying it. How do you reconcile that final part of meat production?
I wrote an article called How Do Animals Feel About Getting Killed for Meat? And I told some interesting stories. One was a colleague of mine who grew up on a farm, and they had a small herd of cows. All were named. And every fall, they would have a solemn meeting at the kitchen table and vote on the cow that was going to be killed for their winter meat. I can hardly tell this story without getting choked up. But anyway, so the next day they would go out to the herd, and always the animal that they had voted on was standing apart, ready to go. And I've heard other stories like this. I met a farmer in Holland who made cheese, and he said we would when we chose the animals to go to the butcher. They were not producing milk anymore. We put them in a special pen and waited for the truck to arrive. And we went and thanked them for their milk. And then they would go very peacefully into the truck. He said, once we had a cow that we put in there and the truck didn't come for some reason. We thanked her and the truck didn't come and she became wild. She was just furious because she was ready. So I think we anthropomorphize animals. Animals are not humans. Edgar Casey said the purpose of animals is to support mankind. The domestic animal is to support mankind. And part of that is being killed for meat. And they know when their moment's there, and that's what they want. So that's part of this supporting mankind. Now, of course, we raise our animals in a humane way, and we thank them. I think it's very important to thank the animals at the end of their lives. We thank our chickens before we kill them. And I think we just have the wrong view of animals. We're trying to turn animals into human beings, and they're not human beings. They're animals, they have a different type of soul, and their purpose in life is to serve mankind. And part of that service is providing us with healthy meat.
Wow.
Anyway, it's called How Do Animals Feel About Being Killed for Meat? So you can look it up.
Yeah, I'm speechless.
Yeah.
I really
The
am.
idea that
Yeah.
the animal that they voted on would be standing apart. She knew who she was, or he knew who he was, waiting for this.
Wow.
It's awe-inspiring.
And you've talked about this as well in your work, that having that relationship with your food, and making sure that you're sourcing locally, that the current corporate infrastructure around big agriculture is why it's not working well for us, and why all of these misconceptions, and why we're so disconnected from both nature and our own bodies, and that much of this can be solved by localizing food production.
And this is a job for Bobby if he wins, or any of the candidates who win. One of the big problems we have is the lack of abattoirs. In the old days, every town had an abattoir, and the farmer could take his meat in and get it inspected and get it butchered and then sell it. And we have this burgeoning grass-fed movement, and the customers want this, but they're up against the fact that there's nowhere they can get their meat butchered. I think it's very hard to get appointments with butchers, and there has to be a USDA inspected butcher, or they can't cut it into pieces and sell it by the piece, which is what people want. And we really need to do something to bring all these small abattoirs back. The USDA has deliberately gotten rid of them because in the interest of efficiency, right? But what it's done is consolidated the beef industry and made it very hard for farmers who are raising their own meat to be able to sell it. And White Oak Pastures, that's a very successful ranch, very successful farm, and they built an abattoir. Joel Salatin, he bought an abattoir that was going to go out of business because otherwise they would not be able to sell their meat. And this is a huge block to the growth of the grass-fed movement. And I hope I've convinced a few people, most important protection against cancer that you can have is grass-fed beef or grass-fed animals. And we need to get this back into our diets, and the only way we can do it is to have abattoirs where it can be butchered, local abattoirs.
And do you think that this is a government function? I mean, the USDA got rid of him as a government function, and we know why, because they, consolidated meat production and did a very poor job around humanely doing so. But is there a private market solution to the
Oh,
for the
you
processing
know, I've
facilities?
been saying recently, if you have, I mean, if you're wealthy, if you've inherited money or you have money, one of the most wonderful things you could do is build an abattoir in a small town.
In a small
And I
town.
promise you, you won't make money on it, but you'll be doing a wonderful favor for
Yeah.
people.
How many do you
But
think we
yes,
need?
I think just to finish that, we're trying to get the Prime Act passed to be included in the current agriculture bill, and that would allow meat to be butchered at custom butchers in the state, because you have custom butchers that do the deer and your own beef or whatever, and sold in the state by the piece. And this would be a huge help.
That's great. Actually, you just opened up another topic that I've been very curious about. Are you a lobbyist, or do you work with lobbyists, or are there DC lobbyists who even know how to lobby for what it is you do?
And that we're not lobbyists. We are a 501(c)(3), which is a nonprofit that allows us to do a little bit of educating. We, of course, do not endorse candidates, but we do work towards educating legislators about raw milk, and we do send out action alerts, usually on the state level. There's a vote in the House about raw milk. And we also have been very active in educating people about the Prime Act, which would allow this local butchering to take place.
Whose bill is it, or who drafted it?
Thomas Massey.
Oh, of course, it was Massey.
Yeah, Thomas Massey,
He's the
and we
best.
have a lot of sponsors now.
Yep.
Lee Marinoff and her husband has really helped us with this. So we're hopeful that it will be included in the Farm Bill, which hasn't been voted on yet.
Yeah, I was just looking at the Farm Bill. It's going to be the first one in American history to exceed $1 trillion.
Really?
Yeah, and they're looking at, like, there's some estimates that it might even be $1.5 trillion. The majority of it is, a lot of it. Not, I don't think it's the true majority, but definitely the part on SNAP. I think it's
This is
almost,
food stamps,
yeah, food. Yeah, it's
what
the
we call
food
food
stamp
stamps.
program.
Now, there's something that could really be looked at. So you go to the grocery store. I don't think what they have is these WIC, Women,
Yes,
Infants, and Children. Is that a USDA? I think it is.
yes, it
I
is.
think
Yeah.
it's a USDA program. Skim milk. You can buy skim milk. You can buy margarine. Can't buy eggs. You can't buy whole milk on the WIC program.
Is that true? I can't. I mean,
Yeah. So yeah, this is
wow.
another way that we're starving our children.
These, I mean, you said earlier when we started talking that so much of our current nutritional guidelines are genocidal. It's impacting low income people the most.
Yes, it is definitely what they would call eugenics program to what they call get rid of the unfit. Our philosophy is that eugenics is up to the parents, and every child can be a perfectly healthy, wonderful, happy child if they're fed right. And to me, that's the true eugenics. It's not getting rid of people; it's supporting people and making sure that everybody's healthy. Dr. Price was challenged on this. In his day, what they called the degeneration, they said it was caused by race mixing, very racist attitude. And Dr. Price wrote pretty extensively on this. He said, this is not what's causing the degeneration in the crowded teeth and all the disease that we're seeing. It's the poor nutrition. And you've taken people out of their traditional diets in one way or another. And yeah, each generation gets weaker and more prone to living in poverty. And, this is our fault. We are not following the science and doing our job to make sure that every child grows up with a healthy diet.
My goodness. Well, you've just been such a gift with your time and your life's work. And
Thank you.
I, I, I mean, I could keep asking you questions for hours. Maybe we'll conclude with this. What are you working on right now? What is your hope? What gives you optimism?
Well, what gives me optimism is that so many moms are doing our diets or doing our formula, and we get wonderful testimonials from parents. Every time I hear about a healthy child, I, as they say, I keep going. So, yeah, the other big issue for us is the whole issue of viruses. And Tom Cowan and I wrote a book called The Contagion Myth, where we argue that there's no such thing as contagious disease. Disease is caused by three things: injury, malnutrition, or toxins. And to blame these diseases on viruses or bacteria is, um, we make them the scapegoat instead of doing the hard work, which is to clean up the diet, clean up the environment. And Lord knows we have a lot of toxins in our environment, or we inject those toxins from day one into our babies. And, you're going up against a very, very powerful interests when you say it's toxins rather than, oh, this is some virus that we can't control and, or do anything about or make us afraid or whatever. So that's a big concern of ours right now. The abattoir thing, the raw milk, I think we've pretty much won that. It's
Yeah.
available almost everywhere.
Good job. Thank you.
As soon as we get all 50 states, we have 3 to go.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a great big party.
I want to come to that
So we'd
party.
love for you to come.
Yeah. Well, let's stay in touch. I would love to. I mean, I almost feel like part of your success has been that you've been so under the radar.
Yes, yes, I agree with you, yes.
And so I'm almost hesitant to release this, but I think that we release it gently and we let people hear and have an introduction. Um, I think, part of the friction that happens is that in order to establish why it's so valuable to fight for raw milk, you have to talk about the issues with pasteurized milk. And in order to fight for a new paradigm around disease, you have to explain why the current paradigm around viruses is false. And that's when it really irks the large corporate interests that are so deeply
Powers to be,
the
yes,
powers
yeah.
that be. It seems like you're able to somehow weave this and you've got some magic to how you're doing it that I feel like many of us who are becoming advocates in this space could learn from. Like we could really learn from your style.
Oh, well, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Sally, for your time.
No, if I could just mention our website, it's westonaprice.org, and we'd love to have you as a member and all your listeners as members to support what we do. And then realmilk.com is where you find the raw milk, and my own website is nourishingtraditions.com.
Wonderful. Well, I will be signing up right after this.